Here is something they will never tell you in school, in church, or in any of the institutions designed to keep you compliant and comfortable. You are living in a prison of your own perception, and the bars of that prison are not made of iron or stone. They are made of beliefs. Beliefs about what is possible, about who you are allowed to be, about the nature of reality itself. You have been taught to see the world through a very narrow lens, a lens that keeps you small, keeps you afraid, keeps you consuming and producing and never ever questioning whether there might be another way to exist entirely. But something inside you has been whispering, hasn't it? Something that the noise of daily life cannot completely drown out. A sense that the reality you have been sold is not the only reality available. A feeling that there are dimensions of existence, ways of being, frequencies of consciousness that you have barely begun to touch. And lately, that whisper has been getting louder. Lately, you have been feeling the walls of your perceptual prison closing in, and you have been wondering, perhaps for the first time in your life, whether escape is possible. Let me tell you the truth that will either liberate you or terrify you, depending on how ready you are to hear it. Escape is not only possible, it is inevitable. Because right now, as we speak, as you listen to these words, the earth itself is shifting. Consciousness is evolving. And you are being invited, whether you realize it or not, to make a leap that will fundamentally alter everything you think you know about what it means to be alive. This is what Joshua David Stone called the shift to the fifth dimension. And before you dismiss this as abstract spiritual theory, before you relegate it to the realm of things that do not apply to your practical everyday life, I want you to ask yourself something. Why do you feel so exhausted all the time? Why does nothing seem to satisfy you anymore, no matter how much you achieve or acquire? Why do you lie awake at 3 in the morning with this gnawing sense that you are running out of time to do something important, even though you have no idea what that something is? These are not random symptoms of modern life. These are not signs that you need a better job, a different relationship, or a longer vacation. These are the labor pains of consciousness trying to birth itself into a new dimension. These are your soul's way of telling you that you have outgrown the third-dimensional paradigm of separation, competition, and fear, and you are being called to step into something infinitely more expansive, more connected, more aligned with your true nature. But here is where most people get stuck. They feel the call, they sense the invitation, but they have no idea what they are being invited into. They have been given no map, no language, no framework for understanding what is happening to them. And so they medicate the discomfort. They numb the restlessness. They double down on the very systems and beliefs that are suffocating them, thinking that if they just try harder, if they just finally get it right, the emptiness will go away. It will not go away, not until you understand what it is actually asking of you. Stone taught that the dimensions are not physical places. They are frequencies of consciousness. Third-dimensional consciousness operates from the belief in separation. It sees the world as a collection of separate objects, separate people, separate interests competing for limited resources. In this dimension, you experience yourself as fundamentally alone, fundamentally disconnected from the source of life itself. You believe that love must be earned, that success requires struggle, that your worth is determined by external validation. You live in constant low-grade fear because in a world of separation, threat is everywhere. Others can take from you. Life can betray you. You are vulnerable and must constantly defend yourself against a hostile universe. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like the water you have been swimming in your entire life, so pervasive you did not even realize it was there? Now imagine a completely different frequency, a dimension where the fundamental truth is connection rather than separation, where you experience yourself as an expression of the infinite, as intimately woven into the fabric of all existence, where love is not something you earn, but something you are, where abundance is natural because you recognize that the same creative force that breathes the stars into being breathes through you, where fear still exists but no longer runs your life, because you know at the deepest level that you are held, you are guided, you are never, ever alone. This is fifth-dimensional consciousness. And the shift from third to fifth is not about going somewhere else. It is not about leaving your body or abandoning your human life. It is about changing the frequency at which you operate. It is about waking up within the dream and realizing you have far more power to shape your experience than you ever imagined possible. But here is what they do not tell you in the spiritual marketplace, where everything is packaged as easy and instant and available for 3 easy payments. The shift to fifth-dimensional consciousness requires something of you. It requires you to let go of everything that has been keeping you safe within the limited paradigm. It requires you to face the parts of yourself you have been running from. It requires you to take radical responsibility for your experience, to stop blaming external circumstances for your internal state, to recognize that you are not a victim of reality, but a creator of it. This is not comfortable work. This is not pretty, or Instagram-worthy, or suitable for casual conversation at dinner parties. This is the deep, transformative labor of consciousness evolution. And most people, when they get close to the edge of this shift, when they feel what it will require of them to actually change rather than just talk about changing, they back away. They choose the familiar prison over the unknown freedom. They choose the comfort of victimhood over the responsibility of sovereignty. They choose to stay asleep rather than face what waking up will demand. And I understand. I understand because the truth is, staying in third-dimensional consciousness is easier in many ways. You know the rules there. You know how to play the game, even if the game is making you miserable. The fifth dimension offers no such certainty. It asks you to trust what you cannot see, to believe in what you cannot prove, to act on inner knowing rather than external authority. It asks you to be so authentic, so vulnerable, so committed to truth that you will lose people who loved the smaller version of you. It asks you to stand alone if necessary, to choose your integrity over approval, your soul's calling over society's expectations. Can you do that? Are you willing to do that? Because that is the real question. Not whether you are ready for the fifth dimension, but whether you are willing to do what readiness requires. Stone was clear about this. He taught that ascension is not a passive process. It is not something that happens to you while you wait around hoping to be chosen. It is something you actively choose, moment by moment, decision by decision, through your willingness to release what no longer serves and embrace what terrifies you. It is a commitment to growth, to healing, to becoming conscious of the unconscious patterns that have been running your life. It is a dedication to love when fear feels safer, to trust when control seems smarter, to openness when protection appears more prudent. This is the path. Not an escape from life, but a full embrace of it at a frequency so high that suffering, while still present, no longer defines you. Joy becomes your baseline rather than your exception. Peace becomes your natural state rather than something you must struggle to achieve. And from that elevated frequency, you discover that you have access to gifts, to capacities, to ways of being that were always available, but could not be accessed from the denser consciousness you were operating from before. You begin to see synchronicities everywhere, evidence that the universe is not random, but responsive. You begin to experience intuition so clear, so reliable, that you trust it more than any external authority. You begin to create with an ease that feels almost magical because you are no longer fighting against the current of life, but flowing with it. You begin to love in ways that are free and full, because you are no longer trying to get something from others that you can only give yourself. You begin to live from such an authentic place that your very presence becomes healing to those around you, not because you are trying to heal them, but because consciousness at higher frequencies naturally uplifts everything in its field. This is what awaits you in the fifth dimension. Not perfection, not the absence of challenge or pain or loss, but a completely different relationship to all of it. A relationship grounded in trust rather than fear, in connection rather than separation, in love rather than lack. But getting there requires something most people are not willing to give: honesty. Brutal, unflinching honesty with yourself about where you are still operating from fear, still clinging to control, still believing the lies that keep you small. It requires you to look at your shadow, the parts of yourself you have disowned and projected onto others. It requires you to forgive, not just others but yourself, for all the ways you have been unconscious, all the ways you have caused harm, all the ways you have abandoned your own truth. It requires you to grieve what you must release in order to evolve. Relationships that were based on your smallness, identities that no longer fit, dreams that belong to someone you used to be. If you are feeling this call, if something in you is resonating with everything I am saying, then like this video, leave a comment sharing where you are on your journey, and subscribe so we can continue exploring these frequencies together. Because what I am about to share with you is not just theory. It is the lived experience of someone who stood at this threshold, who felt the terror and the invitation in equal measure, and who chose to leap. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to understand about the true nature of dimensional shift. Miguel sat on the terrace of his small house in Oaxaca, watching the sun sink behind the Sierra Madre Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet that seemed almost unreal. He had moved here 3 years ago from Mexico City, seeking something he could not name, running from something he could not face. The city had been suffocating him. The job in corporate finance, the apartment that cost more than it should, the girlfriend who wanted marriage and children, and a version of him that he could no longer pretend to be. He had felt like he was drowning in a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt like slow death from the inside. So he left, sold everything, took the money he had saved for a down payment on a house he did not want, and bought this small place with a terrace and a view of mountains that seemed to hold secrets older than human language. His mother had been horrified. His friends had been confused. His girlfriend had been furious. But Miguel had felt, for the first time in years, like he could breathe. That was 3 years ago. Now, at 38, he made a modest living teaching English online and doing freelance consulting for businesses that needed Spanish translation. It was enough. More than enough. He had no car, no mortgage, no ambitions beyond paying his bills and tending the small garden where he grew tomatoes, cilantro and chiles that tasted like the earth itself. From the outside, his life might have looked like a retreat, a withdrawal, even a failure. But Miguel knew better. This simplicity had saved him. This slowness had given him space to finally hear himself think, to finally feel what he had been running from all those years in the city. What he had been feeling lately, though, was harder to name. A restlessness that was not dissatisfaction but something else. A sense that he had completed one chapter and another was trying to begin, but he did not know how to read the language it was written in. He would wake in the hours before dawn, his heart racing with excitement or anxiety, he could not tell which. He would walk through the cobblestone streets of his neighborhood and feel overwhelmed by beauty, by the way light moved on old adobe walls, by the sound of women making tortillas in their kitchens, by the laughter of children playing football in the plaza. Everything seemed more vivid lately, more alive, as if someone had turned up the intensity dial on existence itself. His neighbor, Doña Rosa, an old woman who sold mole negro in the market and seemed to know things without being told, had noticed. She brought him lunch one afternoon, a clay pot of her famous black mole with chicken, still steaming. As they sat on his terrace eating in companionable silence, she said casually, "You are changing frequencies, mijo. The old you is dying, so the new you can be born. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also sacred. Pay attention to what is happening, not just with your mind, but with your whole being." Miguel had not known what to say to that. Doña Rosa spoke in ways that were both too simple and too profound for casual conversation, but her words stayed with him, circling in his consciousness like birds looking for a place to land. That night, unable to sleep, Miguel did something he had not done in months. He opened his laptop and started searching. Not for entertainment or distraction, but for answers to questions he was only beginning to form. He typed, "Why does everything feel more intense?" and spiritual awakening symptoms and dimensional shift consciousness. What appeared on his screen felt like messages from a future version of himself. Articles about ascension, about the shift happening on the planet, about consciousness evolution. And then, a name that kept appearing, Joshua David Stone. Miguel clicked on one of the articles, then another, then found himself reading excerpts from Stone's books about the dimensions, about how consciousness operates at different frequencies, about how the entire planet was undergoing a massive shift from third to fifth dimensional awareness. Miguel read until the sun rose, until the roosters began their morning announcements, until he heard Doña Rosa's door open and the familiar sounds of her starting her day. And something in him understood. Not intellectually, not as a concept he could explain at a party, but as a deep, cellular knowing. This was what was happening to him. This restlessness, this intensity, this sense of the old life falling away. It was not a crisis. It was a chrysalis. He was not losing himself. He was becoming himself at a frequency he had never accessed before. Over the following weeks, Miguel began to pay attention differently. He noticed when he was operating from fear and when he was operating from love. He noticed when he was trying to control outcomes and when he was trusting the flow of life. He noticed the thoughts that kept him small, the beliefs that kept him stuck, the patterns that had been running on automatic for decades without his conscious participation. And he began to experiment. Small things at first. When someone cut him off in traffic, instead of feeling angry and victimized, he chose to assume they were having a difficult day and sent them silent blessing. When a client was rude in an email, instead of taking it personally, he responded with kindness and watched the situation transform. When he felt lonely, instead of scrolling through his phone looking for connection, he sat with the loneliness, breathed into it, and discovered that beneath the uncomfortable emotion was actually a profound sense of connection to everything, a recognition that he was never alone because he was woven into the fabric of existence itself. These were not dramatic changes. There were no lightning bolts or mystical visions. But slowly, steadily, Miguel's experience of life began to shift. He started waking up with energy instead of dread. He started noticing opportunities where before he had seen only obstacles. He started feeling gratitude as his baseline rather than something he had to work to cultivate. And most remarkably, he started experiencing moments of such profound peace, such complete alignment, that he would stop whatever he was doing and just stand there, amazed that this was possible, that this state was accessible right here in his ordinary life. One morning, walking to the market to buy supplies for his week, Miguel passed a young man sitting on the street corner, looking utterly defeated. Without thinking, Miguel sat down next to him. They did not speak for a long time. Then the young man said quietly, "I do not know how to keep going. Everything I try fails. Everyone I love leaves. I am so tired of trying." Miguel felt a response rising in him, not from his mind, but from somewhere deeper. He said, "What if the you who is tired is not who you really are? What if the you who is trying to make everything work is just a character you have been playing? And beneath that character is someone who does not need to try at all because they are already whole, already connected to infinite creative power? What if your exhaustion is actually your soul's way of telling you to stop trying to be that small version of yourself and start being who you actually are?" The young man looked at him, eyes filling with tears. "How do you know that?" he whispered. Miguel smiled. "Because someone helped me remember it when I forgot. And now I am helping you remember. That is how it works." They sat together in silence for another few minutes. Then the young man stood, thanked Miguel with a dignity that spoke of something having shifted in him, and walked away. Miguel watched him go and felt tears on his own cheeks. Not sad tears. Tears of recognition that this was why he was here. Not to build an empire or achieve some external measure of success, but to be a presence of love, of consciousness, of remembrance for others who were forgetting who they were. This was the service his soul had come to offer, and it was only possible because he had been willing to stop playing small, stop pretending, stop living from the frequency of fear and separation. That evening, sitting on his terrace with a cup of hot chocolate made from local cacao and cinnamon, Miguel understood what stone had meant about the fifth dimension. It was not somewhere else. It was right here, available in every moment, accessed not through going somewhere or achieving something, but through shifting his frequency. When he chose love over fear, he was in fifth dimensional consciousness. When he trusted rather than controlled, he was in fifth dimensional consciousness. When he saw himself as connected to all of life rather than separate and alone, he was in fifth dimensional consciousness. The dimensions were not locations. They were choices, ways of perceiving, frequencies of being, and he got to choose, in every single moment, which dimension he would inhabit with his awareness. Doña Rosa came by later that week with a bundle of white copal and a knowing smile. "You found what you were looking for," she said. It was not a question. Miguel laughed. "I was not even sure what I was looking for." She shrugged. "The soul always knows, even when the mind does not. You just had to get quiet enough to hear it." She handed him the copal. "For clearing energy. The old frequency has to be released before the new one can fully establish. Burn this when you feel stuck. And remember, mijo, consciousness is not something you achieve. It is something you remember." In the months that followed, Miguel's life continued to transform, but not in the ways he would have expected. He did not suddenly become wealthy or famous. He did not manifest some perfect relationship or receive some cosmic mission handed down from above. What changed was subtler and far more profound. He became increasingly present, increasingly at peace, increasingly able to meet life as it was, rather than as he wished it to be. And from that place of acceptance, paradoxically, life began to flow with an ease he had never known when he was trying to force and control everything. He attracted clients who valued his work and paid him well. He developed friendships based on authentic connection rather than social obligation. He started writing, just for himself at first, about his experience of shifting frequencies, and discovered that people were hungry for these reflections, for permission to trust their own inner knowing, for reassurance that the discomfort of transformation was normal and necessary, and ultimately leading somewhere beautiful. One afternoon, a year after that night of reading about Stone's work, Miguel received an email from someone who had found his writing online. The person wrote, "I have been feeling like I am losing my mind. Everything I thought I knew about life is falling apart. But reading your words, I realize I am not losing my mind. I am finding my soul. Thank you for helping me see the difference." Miguel sat there staring at that message, tears streaming down his face, understanding with perfect clarity that this was the work. Not the writing itself, but the willingness to be so honest about his own journey that it gave others permission to honor theirs. Not the teaching, but the living. The embodiment of consciousness at a frequency high enough that it naturally uplifted everything it touched. He walked out to his terrace and looked at the mountains, now familiar friends who had witnessed his entire transformation. He thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, so desperate to escape, but not knowing what he was escaping to. He thought about how close he had come to giving up, to deciding that maybe he was just broken, maybe there was something wrong with him, for not being able to fit into the life everyone else seemed to manage just fine. And he felt such gratitude for the breaking, for the crisis that had forced him to leave everything familiar and find out who he was beneath all the conditioning. Because that breaking had been the breaking open, the cracking of the shell, so the bird could finally fly. If Miguel's journey resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in his struggle to reconcile who you have been with who you are becoming, then I invite you to like this video, to share in the comments what dimension you feel yourself operating from most of the time, and to subscribe so we can continue exploring these frequencies together. Because the truth Stone taught, the truth Miguel lived, the truth that is available to every single one of us, is this: you are not stuck in the dimension you currently inhabit. You have far more power than you realize to shift your frequency, to change your perception, to choose which reality you will participate in with your consciousness. The fifth dimension is not waiting for you in some distant future. It is here, now, accessible in this very moment through your willingness to see differently, to love more fully, to trust more completely. It is available every time you choose connection over separation, presence over distraction, authenticity over performance. It is as close as your next breath, your next choice, your next moment of radical honesty with yourself about who you really are beneath all the stories you have been telling. You are ready. You have always been ready. The only question is whether you are willing to let go of what is familiar, willing to step into the unknown, willing to trust that you are held by forces far more intelligent and loving than your fearful mind can comprehend, willing to become who you came here to be, regardless of who that disappoints or confuses or challenges. The fifth dimension is calling you home, not to some distant heaven, but to the truth of your own being, to the recognition that you are not separate from Source, but an expression of it, to the remembrance that love is not something you seek, but something you are, to the frequency where life stops being a struggle and becomes a dance, a gift, a precious opportunity to experience consciousness in human form. And that dance begins now, in this moment, with this choice, to see yourself finally as you truly are. Infinite consciousness, having a temporary human experience, here to remember, here to awaken, here to be the bridge between heaven and earth that you were always meant to be.